The scream pierced the silence like a blade. Sharp, unexpected, final. It came from Miriam, the eldest daughter, just as her father's glass hit the floor and shattered. The old man stood frozen for half a second before his knees buckled. 60 years of silence, pride and buried grief hit the ground with him. He collapsed in the middle of the living room, right before the children who hadn't visited in years. Children who once called him Baba, then stopped calling at all. His wrinkled hand clutched something tightly. A letter. The room, moments ago humming with quiet resentment, now felt like a tomb. No one moved. His son Kamal stepped forward, face pale, whispering, "Baba!" But there was no response, just the heavy breath of a man whose heart had carried too much for too long. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Inside, time seemed to stop. They had all come for Eid, but this was not what they expected. Not a reckoning, not a collapse. They stood like statues, each trapped in a past they had buried, but never escaped. Miriam remembered the time her father missed her graduation. Kamal recalled the day he was slapped for crying at his mother's funeral. These memories clawed back, alive again in the stillness. The old man's breathing was shallow. "He's not waking up," someone said, but no one moved. Because in that moment, they weren't worried about losing him. They were terrified of what they had already lost: years' connection, their place in his life. Miriam dropped to her knees, her fingers brushing the old envelope in his hand. It had her mother's handwriting. Her heart raced. She hadn't seen that script in decades. "This isn't just a fall," she whispered. "It's everything breaking at once." The room had known arguments, punishments, and decades of discipline, but never this kind of silence. Kamal sat beside his father, unable to meet his sibling's eyes. "Why didn't he ever show us this?" he muttered, gesturing toward the letter. No one answered. The question wasn't about the letter, it was about everything. Why hadn't he hugged them? Why did love have to feel like a rule book? Miriam held the envelope tightly. Her voice trembled. "It's addressed to all of us. From Amma, dated 20 years ago." A gasp escaped from their younger sister, Lena Daddle. 20 years. All this time buried in his drawer, close to his chest, but never opened, never shared. Why now? Why not when they still needed her words? The silence shattered again, but this time not from pain. From realization. Lena, the youngest, barely whispered. He read it, over and over. That's why he used to sit by himself every night. The letter wasn't a memory. It was a confession, a bridge never crossed. He had been living with its words alone, while his children lived without them. Miriam opened it, unfolding the brittle paper with shaking hands. Each word written by their mother was a wound and a balm. Regret, love, apologies, and warnings. If he doesn't change, you must protect your hearts. But don't hate him, he carries his own chains. A tear fell on the ink, smudging the past. The letter ended with a plea. If one day he falls, don't let him fall alone. It felt written for this very moment. Kamal closed his eyes, guilt tearing through him like fire. He had once promised himself he'd never forgive his father, but now, forgiveness felt less like a gift and more like a rescue. Miriam placed the letter on the old man's chest. "We were wrong too," she said softly. "We stopped asking. We let the silence win." In that moment, the room changed. Not fully, not miraculously, but a thread had been tied between them again. Thin, trembling, but real. And that thread would decide everything that came next. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and waiting. The old man lay silent, heart monitor beeping a steady rhythm. Kamal sat beside him, elbows on knees, face in hands. He hadn't cried in years, not since his mother's funeral when his father pulled him aside and said, "Men don't weep at graves." That sentence had followed Kamal into adulthood like a shadow. Now he stared at the pale man before him, wondering who had really buried their heart first. "Baba," he whispered, "I needed you, not your strength, you." There was no answer, only the mechanical breath of machines. But Kamal's voice didn't shake when he added, "You taught me how to build walls, but never how to climb out of them." His sister stood in the doorway, arms crossed, listening. Neither of them had the courage to look at each other. They were still that children raised by silence, unsure how to speak their own hearts out loud. Mariam stood outside the hospital room, leaning against a peeling wall. She clutched her phone but didn't call anyone. She didn't need to. Her memories were loud enough. She remembered being 7, holding up a drawing for her father, eyes full of hope. He glanced at it once and said, "Good. But next time, stay inside the lines." That moment never left her. She carried it into every relationship, every attempt to be perfect. She mistook fear for discipline, silence for strength. Her eyes burned now, not just for her father's condition, but for the years she lost trying to earn a love that had no words. "You were there," she murmured to herself, "but you were never with us." She wiped her eyes before anyone could see. Even now the habit remained. Don't show weakness. Be the strong one, the silent one, just like he taught them all. Lena sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, untouched tea cooling in front of her. She was the youngest, the one who barely remembered their mother. What she did remember was fear. Not from beatings, he never raised a hand, but from being invisible. Her father praised Kamal's grades, critiqued Mariam's tone, but Lena, he rarely looked at her. And so, she became quiet. She faded in photos, in conversations, in family decisions. "Maybe if I'd been louder," she whispered to her reflection in the glass wall, "he would have noticed." She laughed bitterly. Or maybe silence was the only thing he respected. The tea went cold, just like every attempt they'd ever made to reach him. Still, here they all were. Not because they forgave him, but because part of them still wanted to be seen. That night, they sat together for the first time in years. No television, no distractions. Just the three of them in the hospital lounge, wrapped in silence that didn't feel empty anymore, just full of things unsaid. "He never hit us," Kamal finally said. Mariam nodded slowly. "No. He just disappeared in the same room." Lena added, "He made us strong by making us feel alone." No one corrected her, because it was true. And maybe, just maybe, the worst part wasn't what he did. It was what he never learned to do. Express love. Apologize. Ask how their days were. They didn't hate him. They just didn't know how to love him safely. But tonight, the silence between them felt like a bridge. For the first time, they weren't grieving alone. They were grieving as children of the same absence. In the early hours, Kamal returned to the bedside. His father's chest rose and fell slowly, machines beeping rhythmically. Kamal took a deep breath and whispered, "You wanted us to be strong. But strength without softness is just silence with a sword." He pulled out a photograph from his wallet. An old one. All of them as children. Their mother smiling. His father young but already distant in the frame. "We didn't need a fortress," Kamal said, voice cracking. "We needed a father who could sit beside us, not above us." He placed the photo on the table beside the letter. Then he whispered what none of them had said before. "I still love you. But I wish I didn't have to learn how, without you." The monitor beeped on. The man didn't move. But something inside the room changed, something you couldn't see, but could feel. The old man stirred briefly that morning, just a twitch of fingers, but it sent a tremor through the siblings. They weren't ready. Not for apologies. Not for another silence. Kamal stepped out to breathe, but found himself in the hospital prayer room. The stillness there was louder than anything outside. He sank to his knees, eyes fixed on the carpet pattern. "God, I hated him," he whispered, hands clenched. "And I became him." His temper, his distance from his own children, the way he stiffened when hugged, it was all his father's legacy. "What's the point of surviving pain if you pass it on?" he asked the silence. He didn't expect an answer. But he needed the question to stop echoing in his chest. In that moment, Kamal saw the truth. The man who raised him was a victim too. Of war, of culture, of fathers before him. The question was, when does someone break the cycle? Mariam sat beside her unconscious father, brushing imaginary dust from his blanket. I used to dress like this just to impress you, she said softly, gesturing to her formal outfit. Always neat, always good, always invisible. Her voice trembled. You loved obedience more than you loved your children. She blinked away tears. But Amma loved us messy, loud, human. Her shoulders shook. I stopped drawing. I stopped singing. I thought maybe if I was perfect you'd notice. She leaned forward. You never did. The weight of her words hung like incense, bitter, slow burning. And yet, she didn't leave. She stayed. Because some part of her still needed to be that little girl holding up a drawing, hoping he'd finally say, "It's beautiful." Lena walked alone outside the hospital, the evening breeze brushing past her like forgotten promises. Her footsteps were soft on the gravel path, but her mind was loud. She replayed the last birthday her father actually remembered. She was 10. He had handed her a book on math and said, "Be sharp. The world eats the soft." No smile. No hug. Just cold wisdom packaged as love. I didn't want to be sharp, she whispered. I wanted to be seen. She paused under a flickering light, staring up at the sky. You thought silence was safety, but it was a cage. She had become successful. On paper. Good job, polished manners, achievements. But no one knew she cried after every phone call with him. Because he never asked how she was. Only, how's work? Like she was a report, not a daughter. Back in the room, Mariam opened her mother's letter again. Read it, Lena urged. Her voice cracked. Kamal nodded. Mariam's lips trembled as she began. The lines were raw. He loves you, but he does not know how. He holds fear like others hold prayer. Their mother had tried to save them from him, but also tried to save him from himself. Do not harden in response to his hardness, or you will forget softness too. The sibling sat still, tears sliding down cheeks that had been trained not to cry. Their mother had seen what was coming. She knew the cost of passing down pain, and she left them a warning wrapped in love. Mariam closed the letter, her voice barely above a breath. She wasn't just writing to protect us. She was begging us not to become him. Kamal stood by the window, arms crossed. Do you think he ever regretted it? Lena looked up. Regret isn't enough, she said. What good is regret if it comes after the damage? Mariam added, we waited our whole lives for an apology that never came. Now we're just trying to decide if silence was his answer or his curse. They all turned to look at their father, still, silent, unmoving. His chest rose and fell, but he was far away. And they stood between two truths, the damage he caused and the pain he carried. Neither erased the other. Maybe, Kamal said, this isn't about forgiving him. Maybe it's about choosing not to become him. That was the turning point. The shift. From anger to reckoning. From blame to a broken kind of understanding. That evening, a nurse arrived with an envelope. We found this in his coat pocket, she said gently, handing it to Kamal. The handwriting was recent, shaky, uneven, but unmistakably their father's. Mariam opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a short letter. The heading read, "To my children, in case I never wake up." The room went still. Kamal read aloud. There are things I never said because I didn't know how. I thought providing was enough. I thought silence was safer. But I see now, I raised warriors and orphans in the same breath. A chill passed through them. He had known. He had carried the shame. It wasn't ignorance, it was fear. I was raised to survive, not to feel. I thought I was protecting you, but I was only repeating what broke me. The letter continued, each word like a tremor. I punished you for your emotions because I didn't know how to hold mine. I dismissed your dreams because I was too afraid to chase mine. And I never spoke of your mother, not because I forgot her, but because remembering her made breathing harder. Lena covered her mouth, sobbing. This wasn't the man she thought she knew. She was the only softness I ever touched. When she left, I became stone. I thought I had to be. Miriam whispered. He was grieving too. It hit them then. He hadn't been cruel for cruelty's sake. He had been broken. Left behind with children he didn't know how to raise alone. The letter ended with, "If I hurt you, know it was never from hatred. It was from fear. And if this is the end, I want you to know I did love you. I just never learned to say it." They didn't speak for a while after reading it. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was sacred. A space being made for understanding. All this time we hated him for not being like Amma, Miriam said. But he lost her too. He just didn't have the tools to mourn like we did. Kamal nodded slowly. He wasn't trying to be cold. He was trying not to drown. The hospital lights flickered gently above. Lena placed the letter beside their mother's. Two voices, decades apart, now finally in conversation. One begged them to protect their hearts. The other, to understand his. And in that fragile space between both letters, something clicked. Their story wasn't about one villain. It was about broken people, loving badly, but loving still. Later that night, Kamal found an old voicemail on his phone. A missed call from months ago. He had never listened. With shaking hands he pressed play. His father's voice came through. Strained, halting. "Kamal, I saw your son's picture. He looks like you did when you were small. I don't know what to say, but you're a good father. I know that much." Silence. Then, "I'm sorry I never told you that about yourself. I didn't want you to grow up like me, but maybe you had to learn what not to be." Kamal pressed the phone to his forehead, eyes shut tight. That was the first time in his life he had ever heard his father say he was proud. And it came too late. Or maybe just late enough to matter. Morning came slowly, sunlight creeping into the room like a blessing and a question. The siblings hadn't slept. They sat around their father, changed. Not healed. Not whole. But no longer angry. He didn't hide the letters because he was cruel, Miriam said. He hid them because he thought he'd failed us. Lena whispered, but he didn't. He made it this far. Kamal stood, brushing dust off his shoulders as if shedding an old weight. "Maybe this is what forgiveness looks like," he said. "Not forgetting, not excusing, but finally understanding why it hurt so much." Their father stirred. Eyelids flickered. And for the first time in a long time, the three children reached for his hand, together. No words. Just contact. As if to say, "We're still here. If you want to try again." The old man opened his eyes slowly, like lifting stones from a grave. Light burned. Shapes blurred. But then, three familiar faces came into view. No bitterness. No demands. Just stillness. He tried to speak, but his throat rebelled. Kamal leaned in. "Baba, we read your letter." The old man blinked, a tear escaping the corner of his eye. He opened his mouth, but all that came was a whisper, "I'm sorry." The words cracked like dried earth. Miriam pressed her lips together, then leaned down and said, "We needed to hear that a long time ago." He nodded slowly, breath shaky. "I know." His voice broke. "I didn't know how to be more than what raised me." Lena reached for his hand. "But you're still here. You get to try again." For the first time in his life, the old man wept in front of his children. And they didn't look away. "I thought silence made me strong," he whispered, voice like crumpled paper. "But it made me a stranger to my own children." Miriam placed her forehead to his. "You were strong, just in the wrong direction." His breath hitched. "Your mother, she tried to warn me. I didn't listen." Kamal stepped forward. She didn't want us to hate you. She wanted us to understand you. Lena added, and maybe teach you what love feels like even now. The old man's shoulders shook. I don't deserve it, Kamal said. Neither did she, but she gave it anyway. The silence between them no longer screamed. It exhaled. Decades of distance burned away in a single moment of shared pain. And finally, honesty. This was not reconciliation. It was resurrection. They brought out the old photo. Mother, father, and the children. Time had yellowed its edges, but the moment it captured felt brand new again. The father stared at it for a long while. She gave us everything, he murmured. And I gave you shadows. Miriam shook her head. No, you gave us roots. You just forgot to water them. Kamal smiled faintly. We turned out okay. A bit cracked, but still standing. Lena whispered, she'd be proud you're here now. The old man closed his eyes, holding the photo to his chest. If I don't have much time left, he said, then let it be honest, let it be soft. That line sat heavy on their hearts. The warrior was lowering his armor. At last, Miriam stood by the window, watching a bird land on the sill. I used to draw birds, she said quietly. Her father turned his head slowly. I know, he said. I kept everyone. Her eyes widened. What? In a box under my bed, he replied. They reminded me of your mother's spirit, free and full of color. Miriam's tears fell without resistance. She had spent her life thinking she didn't matter to him, when in truth he'd cherished her in secret. Why didn't you ever tell me? She asked. Because I thought love needed to be earned, not shown. That line shattered her. Not because it hurt, but because she finally understood how brokenness had shaped the man they called father, and how it had shaped them too. As the day passed, their words became softer. No longer interrogations, just conversations. Stories. Laughter between tears. The kind of warmth that should have come decades earlier. The old man said, I was afraid love would make you weak. Kamal responded, but it's the only thing that kept us strong. Lena added, you didn't fail us completely. You just forgot we needed you whole, not hollow. The father closed his eyes, breathing in their words like medicine. Then let this be my beginning, he said. Not an ending. A beginning. A chance. As the sun dipped beyond the window and golden shadows crawled across the floor, 3 grown children leaned closer to the man who once stood tall and unreachable. And finally, they embraced him. Not because he asked, but because he finally opened his arms. The next day felt like the quiet after a storm, tender, uncertain. The old man slept peacefully, his breathing steadier than before. Outside his room, the siblings gathered around a vending machine, laughing softly as Kamal struggled with a stuck snack. He'd yell at us for laughing here, Lena joked. Miriam smiled. And then laugh with us 5 seconds later if no one was watching. Ah. Kamal finally freed the snack and tossed it to her. We never really left this family. We just waited for it to begin. No one said it, but they all knew. Forgiveness doesn't erase hurt. It makes space for it. For truth. For reconnection. They weren't children anymore. But for the first time in a long time, they felt like someone's children again. Later that afternoon, the doctor came with news. Their father would recover, but slowly. He has time, the doctor said. Make it count, Pite. Those 4 words echoed. Time, 1. Count, 1. Words their family had never known how to hold. Miriam helped their father drink water, wiping his chin gently. We've wasted enough of it, she whispered. He nodded. No more hiding, he said, voice hoarse but sure. Lena brought in old photos. Kamal played a voice note from his son. And they began reintroducing him to what he'd missed, not with shame, but with soft insistence. You still belong here. Their visits weren't perfect, but they were consistent. And that was new. That was healing. The kind that doesn't rush, but roots. Weeks later, they brought their father home. The house felt different, smaller, older, yet somehow softer. The worn furniture, the old clock, the dusty shelves, it all waited, like the walls had held their breath. The father sat in his favorite chair, blanket on his knees, the window open. A photo of his wife rested beside him. "I kept her alive through silence," he said. "Now, I'll honor her with words." Kamal handed him a journal. "Start with this." The old man opened it. Blank pages stared back, inviting him to try. "I won't fix everything," he whispered. Miriam replied, "It's not about fixing. It's about choosing not to repeat." Outside, a breeze stirred the trees. The house, once silent, began to listen again. One evening, the father gathered his children around the table. He held the journal, now filled with uneven but determined writing. "I've written letters to each of you," he said, "to be opened only when I'm gone." The room tensed, but he smiled. "Not because I plan to leave, but because I want you to know me fully, not through regret, but through memory." Lena reached over, squeezing his hand. "You don't have to wait to tell us," she said. "We're listening now." The father exhaled deeply. "Then let me begin with this. I'm proud of the people you became, in spite of me." The tears returned, but this time they were rooted in pain. They were cleansing. The beginning of legacy, not of silence but of truth. That night, Miriam watched her father fall asleep in his chair, journal on his lap. She tucked a blanket over him, then stepped outside. The stars were quiet, but inside her, something shifted. Not closure, not perfection, but peace. She had spent a lifetime trying to be seen, and now, for once, she didn't feel invisible. Kamal joined her, hands in pockets. "He's changing," he said. "So are we," she replied. Lena appeared last, holding tea. They stood side by side under the sky that once felt too far away. "We didn't heal because he apologized," Miriam said. "We healed because we decided the story would end differently." And in that moment, they weren't just his children. They were the authors of what came next. A month later, the house was filled with voices again. Not arguments, not orders, just stories. Laughter, shared meals. The old man moved slower now, leaning on his cane, but his eyes had softened. At dinner, Kamal joked about Lena's childhood tantrums. Miriam rolled her eyes. Their father chuckled out loud. It startled them. He'd always smiled with his mouth closed. But now his laughter was open, cracked, real. "I missed this," he said, voice thick. "Or maybe I never had it to miss." Lena poured tea into his cup. "Then let's not miss another moment." No one clapped. No music played. But the moment was a kind of music in itself. A family finding harmony not by being perfect, but by being willing. That night, the old man sat alone in the backyard, a shawl around his shoulders. The moon hung heavy and clear above him. He opened the last page of his journal and wrote one final line. "Sometimes we become the very silence that once hurt us." Then he closed it, breathing in the cold night air. He didn't feel young. He didn't feel fully forgiven. But he felt something he hadn't in years, present. The past hadn't vanished, but it had finally settled into something softer. A scar, not a wound. "Amira," he whispered to the sky, "they're going to be all right." The wind answered gently, brushing his cheek. A reply only his soul could hear. In the days that followed, small things changed. Kamal held his son longer during bedtime stories. Lena spoke louder in meetings. Miriam painted again, for the first time in decades. Not to impress, just to feel. None of them spoke about their father daily, but his presence lived in their choices, not as a shadow, but as a lesson. They didn't let pain shape them in silence anymore. They gave it a name, a voice, and then they moved forward. Because that's what healing does. It doesn't erase what happened. It allows you to choose how the next part is written. Their childhood wasn't rewritten, but their future no longer repeated it. One evening, the siblings sat together again. No crisis, no hospital, no apologies. Just a couch, some tea, and the memory of what they survived. "Do you think he'll change completely?" Lena asked. Kamal shook his head. "No, but I think we already have." Miriam leaned back. "That's enough. That's more than we ever got." Outside, a car drove by. A child's laughter echoed in the distance. Miriam smiled. "He taught us to carry pain quietly, but maybe now, we carry truth loudly." And in that silence they felt it. Not an end, not a bow-tied finale, but a new beginning seeded in every wound they once buried. A choice. And this time, they would choose differently. Long after the house grew quiet, after the last light was turned off, a whisper seemed to hang in the air, like something remembered rather than spoken. The narrator's voice returned, gentle but resolute. "Sometimes the only way to stop your father's silence from becoming your own is to speak." The final image wasn't of the father. It wasn't of pain. It was of Miriam's painting, a young girl at a window waiting. But this time, the door behind her is open. Light floods in. The story didn't end with healing. It ended with a choice. And for once, the family chose not to wait for change, but to become it.